Today on the Retro Zoo Super Show, I don't want to be Elf Star anymore. I want to be Debbie.
Live from Kakariko Village. Broadcast throughout the Retroverse, transmitted to the real world via a maze of wires connecting a Super Nintendo to a Wii, to a Wi-Fi network, and finally to the internet. The Techno Funk Boy presents the Retro Zoo Super Show. Now here are your hosts, Kai and Steven.
Welcome to the Retro Zoo Super Show, and I am your host, Kai. Really appreciate you being here today. So we are kind of wrapping up our Dungeons and Dragons series that we've actually spent the last couple of months on, and had a lot of fun doing it. We've been actually playing a lot of Dungeons and Dragons stuff lately, and it's one of those things that when you do like a long series like this, you kind of think that like by the end of it you're going to be tired of the topic, and that has not been the case at all at any point where we've done one of these series. I think the first one we did was probably Dragon Warrior, and that was just an absolute blast, and I got more excited about Dragon Warrior by the end of it. And then we did Zelda 2, and it's the same thing. This just got more excited about the topic as we went, and it's the same with Dungeons and Dragons. As y'all know, I've been playing in the Dice and Dreary podcast, playing Crethan Damathyr, and have just had an absolute ball with that. We actually just finished. We just wrapped up recording some of the kind of behind the scenes episodes for the Patreon account over there, and just not getting sick of this stuff at all. And so, kind of sorry to see this thing wrap up, but I think that we're about to deal with our second bad movie. We've gone through a lot of games, and so I think it's time to wrap it up. One thing to note, and if you download these episodes right away, I think you can still get it. But GOG.com, I just put a sale on the Forgotten Realms Archive #1, and this is a set of games that has all three Eye of the Beholder games in it, and the sale, it's a very reasonable price normally for those games, but the sale was quite steep. And even though the Beholder in the game, as I mentioned when we discussed the game, even though the Beholder stresses me out, and in that game, I just had to pick those up because the first one at very least is a great game. I haven't played the second or third, and so kind of looking forward to getting into those. But so if you are so inclined, GOG.com. It also has the Forgotten Realms Archive #2, which has the series that begins with Pool of Radiance, and and goes forth from there. And it has several of those style games in it that are just great as well. And so very much worth picking up if you enjoy that like first generation of Dungeons and Dragons games, the SSI Gold box games that we discussed in a prior episode. You just go check out those episodes on Eye of the Beholder and Pool of Radiance. But okay, so a few things we need to talk about before we get going. Drum, first of all, we are produced as always by Drum. How are you doing today?
I am functioning normally.
Fantastic, Drum. We have been just remarkably busy, and what I was planning to do this episode is to debut the April song, my Mega Man 3 song. Even I know it's May. And we're hoping to debut it, and it's all finished. It's all finished except the mixing, which we have to do before we debut it. And so, unfortunately, that is going to have to wait till next week. For people on Patreon, so what's going on is we are going through the Mega Man 3 soundtrack, which is actually my favorite NES soundtrack, and we are covering the songs on that soundtrack in our own techno funk boy style, and having just a lot of fun with them. And so these songs are available for download for our patrons at any level. So even at the $1 a month level, you will be getting a free Mega Man song every month. We are, as we finish up other songs, we're also throwing them in there. We put in the vocal theme song for Dice and Jury in there a couple of months ago, which was a lot of fun to do, and a little bit different than most of what we play. But it came out really great, and I was really, really proud of it. So the April song has just been kicking my butt, and when you hear it, you're going to understand why. It's I kind of got this vision for this song that changes it up quite a bit and really looks at this tune from a different perspective and in a different style and approaches it that way, and changing that much about the song while still making it recognizable and still making it fun just turned out to be a lot of work. And so we've been working really hard on this one, and thankfully next month's song is a lot simpler. It's going to be a lot more straightforward. So we're going to try to get a little bit more back on schedule. Hopefully get the next song out by the end of May. So if you have held out from joining our Patreon page, patreon.com/technofunkboy, not only are the previous 2 songs available on there, but I'm really hoping that May will have 2 songs so that we do get back on schedule. And we're going to be working hard on that. So yeah, kind of what happened this week is we were getting down toward the end of it, but we had a hard deadline on the new episode of Dice and Dreary. And if you don't listen to that, we do the music for that podcast, and we've kind of changed our approach on it, where when we first started doing the show, we recorded a bunch of songs, and we had them in mind for certain circumstances, and so we would send them to the DM, Jeff, who was actually just on the show last week, and he would put them into the episode. That was challenging. That was challenging because we would send them stuff that's like, no, it's like we intend this, and then we would get it back and it would have a different tune there, and we'd be like, no, I would, almost like argue with them, in a very polite way. I mean, we don't ever have knockdown dragouts or anything, but in a polite way of like, no, I intended this song for that, and he would write me back, and it's like, it just doesn't work. And since I wasn't involved in the editing process, it's like it's hard for me to picture that, right? we changed the way we approached a little bit, where I'm not getting those episodes without the music, and editing the music in myself, which has actually been a lot of fun, and it's a lot more challenging. And I'm now hearing exactly what he means, because the first episode we did this on, I think it was episode 7, maybe. The first episode we did it, it's like I wanted a particular theme in at a particular moment, and I put it in there, and it just didn't work. And I'm like, oh, this is actually what he's been talking to me about this whole time. It just didn't fit. And so I was like, oh, it needs to be a lot less complex. It needs to be a lot softer. And so what we started doing, for some, a lot of the songs we would put in as we had previously recorded full versions of, but then a lot of it we were just, just break out the keyboard and start live performing it along with the episode, which was something I've never done before. And was actually pretty cool. And really tied the music into the narrative a lot more. And so this week we had another episode due, and it came out a couple of days ago, and it's a really good episode. So if y'all don't listen to Straight, check that out. But there's like a lot of cool stuff going on in the episode that I wanted to express musically as well, and I really should go back and time it out, but I really think that I put 40 minutes of music into that episode, which is kind of crazy. And it's not like that's what we performed, right? Because some of those tunes we had previously recorded, and then some of them we looped to make it a little easier, because it just needed to be the same thing. And so it was like, well, okay, we've done this part, let's just repeat it. And so it's not like we were sitting there performing 40 minutes of music on the spot, but it turned out to just eat up time. But it was a blast, and it came out great. So that hard deadline kind of pushed aside the soft deadline of the new Mega Man song. So I apologize for our patrons. You will actually get this song very soon after this episode launches. I am shooting for wrapping things up this weekend, maybe Monday, and then we will debut it next week on the show. But patrons will already have had it for several days by that point. So, and then we're well on our way on the next one. We've got kind of the vision in mind, and so this one's going to be a little bit simpler to do. And so we're going to start kind of catching up because of that. But so we have a lot to do today. So several weeks ago, when we had Justin Baker from Retro Warriors on, he brought up the movie Mazes and Monsters. And I said then, it's like, okay, I'm going to listen to it. I'm going to give a review next week. And that was several weeks ago. Well, I did actually watch it in time, but it really kind of made me want to tackle the Satanic Panic as a whole. Because, depending on how old you are and depending on what part of the country you are from, you might have actually felt this, like, very intensely, or maybe not at all. But it was a very real thing, and actually had direct impact on a lot of people's lives, including my own. And so the event that inspired Mazes and Monsters was also one of the events that really dragged Dungeons and Dragons into this whole thing. There were a lot of external factors as well that didn't have anything to do with Dungeons and Dragons, or by extension, video games. And it would take me way too long to go into a lot of them, and not all of them would be appropriate discussion for us today on this show. Anyways, being a family show, but what really happened was that some events took place that, rightly or wrongly, mostly wrongly, were attributed to Satanism. And the way rumors go and the way rumors spread, these tales just became more outlandish, more elaborate. And it really, most of the blame was not necessarily like on what we would assume would be like the religious people. Most of it, honestly, had to do with the media, because they were reporting these things in all their exaggeration because it brought in viewers. And this is something we're going to see when we get to the Dungeons and Dragons thing too, is that people found a way to find an audience because of this. And so they helped spread the panic. Now that's on one side of things. On one of the other sides is people who were genuinely concerned about the welfare of their children and saw a problem in a lot of these things. And so one of the events that kind of set things off was just this massive drama and trial for these people who ran a preschool. And by the time it got so exaggerated and reached like the common person, it was crazy and big enough to cause people to really start being concerned that their children were going to get snagged off the street and put in the middle of a satanic ritual, which I'm sure probably has happened, but it's not really very likely. And so, we all kind of, most of us at least, grew up with this, with like phrases like stranger danger and stuff. And this is really where this kind of thing started. It's not to say like that before this, kids were not taught to be wary of strangers, but it just went into this overdrive, during the 80s into the 90s and even to today, that, we've like inherited a culture where parents are expected to watch their children all day, every day. And this was not the case up until very recently. And it's the case now because of the whole stranger danger thing, because we think that there are people running around like in every neighborhood looking for kids to swipe. And I know when I say it like that, we don't, we're like, no, I don't actually believe that, but we do. We do. Because we're so, we're so tied into that fear that it's even shocking to see kids out alone. Cause everybody is working on that, on those premises. And this was not the case at all when I was a kid, even in the real heart of the Satanic Panic. That sort of stuff was starting to catch on. But goodness, when I was a kid, and anyone my age, probably even younger, could tell you is, especially like during the summer, like we ate breakfast and then we left and then we came back for dinner, and our parents didn't have the foggiest clue where we were, So, it's like, a couple of decades earlier, they had that advertising campaign that was just, just part of our consciousness that it's 7 p.m. Do you know where your children are? Do you know where your kids are? But that was set at 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. This was not like 2:00 in the afternoon. No one knew where their kids were at 2:00 in the afternoon. We just hope, they definitely should be home by 10 though. And this was just kind of the way things were. And that's changed dramatically. And a lot of it had to do with these stories that were going around. So where it kind of gets pulled into Dungeons and Dragons is in the story of James Dallas Egbert III. Now, this story is, we've mentioned it before, and I got some of the details wrong, and so we'll go into a little bit more detail. But he was just an absolute genius kid. So he finished high school early. He was enrolled in Michigan State University at the age of 16. He was majoring in computer science. He was just a very, very, very bright young man. And he had a lot of emotional issues. And they worked their way out in very self-destructive ways. So, and this is something that, I'm very sympathetic toward, because when I was a kid, I was like this. And I wasn't playing D&D. So, all you people who want to blame that's not it. But I was like this. And by God's grace, I got out of that time period and worked through a lot of this stuff. I still struggle a lot with depression, but not nearly to that extent anymore. And for those who do listen to Dice and Dreary, it's one of the things that I'm trying to bring to the character of Crethin is that kind of depression and introvertedness, which are not related. It's just two aspects of his personality that causes him to struggle in a lot of ways. And a lot of it is me imagining my high school self, as now an adventurer. And this is the kind of stuff that, Egbert was going through. And so in 1979, he intended to commit suicide. And he wrote a note, and he went down into the university's steam tunnels, and it was intending to commit suicide. He took some drugs, and he didn't die. And he woke up, and he it sounds like he kind of freaked out. That, he's realizing that, his notes probably found, I'm speculating at this point, but he went into hiding, essentially, is what happened. And Gen Con, which was a tabletop role-playing game convention, was starting on that same day. He was hiding out at a friend's house. Some attendees said that they saw him there. I don't know if they actually did or not, but he was hiding. And so the search began. And Egbert's parents, who didn't know that he was fine and just in hiding, hired a private detective named William Deere. Now Deere jumps to conclusions seemingly really quick. And he's like, oh, this kid plays Dungeons and Dragons. That's probably what's pushing him over the edge. And Deere is the type that self-promotes a lot. And so he took this idea to the media. And so they started to, speculate that he was down in the Steam Tunnels actually playing this game or LARPing, which is the live action role playing, which, and disappeared during one of these sessions. So Egbert in this time is like moving around and eventually hightails it to Louisiana. And this is where the story just gets more and more tragic, because this Egbert is not one of these figures that we sometimes hear about that attempts suicide and fails and figures out that he has a lot to live for, because he tries again and then he tries again and he succeeds that time. And so, in 1980, he dies. Before this time, he had been found. And so the whole story finally is like, okay, no. He's found. He didn't just disappear into these steam tunnels. But this news story was just all over the place for weeks. And because of William Deere, it was very much tied to Dungeons and Dragons. So this is not helping things. And furthermore, the game itself is not helping things, because there, especially like in the first edition of Dungeons and Dragons, there are like a lot of images and concepts that are drawn from the occult, demons and stuff like that, and a lot of these were toned down in later publications. But this is really the nation's first look into this thing. And it's very much out of their experience, out of their realm of experience. And so you can, it's so easy to look back and, go, oh, what, these idiots, they don't know anything. But this is a time when Dungeons and Dragons was not very popular. It had only been out for a few years. They had sold several copies. They were climbing in popularity, but it was not a household name like it is now. It was not something that you could just, you could find someone who played this thing and have an explanation of it. If you found, if your child had one of these books and you looked at it for the first time, especially in the context of like Egbert's story, it would be very easy. It'd be very easy to just be, at very least, taken aback, or at most to really seriously, start wondering about what this thing what kind of influence this thing had on people. And the stories like Egbert's story actually caused the popularity of Dungeons and Dragons to boom, because I mean they were getting on like 60 Minutes and stuff, and they were, Gary Gygax was being interviewed on primetime television, and all of a sudden a bunch of people who had never heard of this thing, it's being explained to them, and they're thinking, oh wow, that sounds actually like a lot of fun, and so they jumped on it. And so all of a sudden, I just, imagine yourself as a parent. This is something that's completely outside of your experience, and you're looking at it, and there's all sorts of demons and stuff, and in it, and it is taking off. And in that context, while we certainly wouldn't agree with it, the reaction should be at least understandable. And that's one thing. This is one thing that I want us as a community to be just more sympathetic toward. Is that it, especially looking at the way people reacted to things in the past, or the way people react to things that do not have the same context that you do, that are looking at things from a completely different point of view, that we certainly don't want to agree, and there's going to be some stuff that we get to that I'm going to say was just absolutely wrong for people to do. And not just like, well, we have different perspectives and we disagree, but I think it was wrong. But at least can be understood. And this is something that every generation deals with. It's when the next generation gets hold of something that is outside of your experience, and our instinct is to say it's stupid, and these kids are stupid, right? And that's our instinct, and maybe they are, but there was once upon a time that we were trying to bring Dungeons and Dragons home, and we weren't allowed to, because our parents were seeing something from a completely different point of view, and getting concerned about it. And so that is definitely something that I think is worthwhile for us to do. So this brings us into Mazes and Monsters, but we're going to get to that right after the break. We'll see you then. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this is Phil from philsgamingemporium.com. That's your source for all your retro gaming needs and your tabletop needs. I have been so inspired by this new series. I am so pumped that I have gathered some of the greatest, the just top tier free resources from online and printed them all together and stapled them together, and now this pack of personally cultivated materials, personally cultivated resources can be yours for the low price of $59.99. Head over to philsgamingemporium.com, philsgamingemporium.com, and we will see you there. Okay, we're back. So, 1979, James Dallas Egbert III disappears and is eventually found, with William Deere, pointing to Dungeons and Dragons the whole time. 91, Rona Jaffe publishes the book Mazes and Monsters, and it is clear that she doesn't have the foggiest clue what she's talking about, as far as Dungeons and Dragons goes, but it's very, very thinly veiled. discussion. A kind of a fictionalized exploration of the Egbert story. This gets made into the movie Mazes and Monsters, the very next year, starring Tom Hanks. And so this is the garbage I watched. So, what's really sad about this is a story that should draw our attention to mental health, to draw our attention to, just the rampant depression in teenagers then and now, in trying to really dig into that problem, to sink our teeth into it, to figure out how to it's not a problem we'll ever solve, but to reach people quicker, to recognize this, the issue quicker, to be on top of this. This was a perfect opportunity for that. And instead it's pointing to Dungeons and Dragons. And the movie is so weird because there are times when it really does play like a serious exploration of Tom Hanks's character's mental state, but then it just it takes left turns and returns to Dungeons and Dragons, or Mazes and Monsters as it's called in this thing. It returns to that and says, it's like, oh, but this is a really bad thing. And the position of the work is not that Mazes and Monsters itself is the culprit, but that it's a draw for specifically broken children. And so all of the four characters in this story, are all kind of battling these inner demons. And they kind of turn to the game, as an outlet for that. The movie kind of interestingly sets up an Egbert character, a 16-year-old prodigy who is in college. And he even says in there, he's like, oh, people will remember me if I kill myself. And it's really because this thing just happened, you think, oh, okay, that's Egbert. And it's not. It's the Tom Hanks character. But his trip into insanity is to think more and more that he is his character in the game. And then, one of the other guys, just also, everybody has this monologue in the movie about basically how broken they are because of, their childhood or something. And this is what draws them to the game. And one of the other characters has this whole speech about, how I really feel like I'm that person. So it's this thing that's it can't keep its focus. It's is the problem Dungeons and Dragons? Is the problem that all of these kids are in some way broken, or is the problem the very real mental illness of Tom Hanks's character? And the movie doesn't land on any one of those. This is going, this is that all of the normal problems, right, with bad films of just bad writing and bad acting. Tom Hanks himself is he's either really kind of weird and off, as he very often was in his early films, or he's just so good that he's outshining everyone, and everybody else is just kind of middle of the road, just competent. But the Dungeons and Dragons scenes, or the Mazes and Monsters scenes, are just laughable. They have, it really is what adults think the Dungeons and Dragons session is. And it's not, right? So they start off with this really weird ceremony. with kind of chanting their characters' names and levels, and their accomplishments and all this stuff, and they have these ceremonies of joining adventures and stuff, and just watching it's like I've never seen anything like this, and then they do go LARPing, not in the steam tunnels, but in this giant cave system near the college, which actually looked like a lot of fun, but once again, it's like no, this is not like a witch's ritual. Normally it's about Cheetos, root beer, and kind of laughing, and the dungeon master trying to get everybody to to focus and stuff like that. That's what it's like. But she just makes no effort in this. All right. So that happened, and then John Coyne writes this book a couple of years later, called Hobgoblin, which is not nearly as thinly veiled a commentary on what's happened, right? On Egbert's story, but it's just still like pushing this obsession with violence, with people who get involved are broken. There's something wrong with them, and when they're around normal people, it's like it doesn't go well. Okay, and things end very, very, very badly. William Deere himself published a book called The Dungeon Master, which is the story of James Dallas Egbert III. And you notice it's called The Dungeon Master. It's like long been established that Dungeons and Dragons had nothing to do with his disappearance, right? But we're still pushing the narrative because that sells. All the while, these things are hitting television, which. And this is where we start getting into stuff that was just wrong. It's like it's one thing to be a concerned parent, but to push this narrative for ratings, to cause that panic is just wrong. To try to cash in on your involvement in the case by still pushing the Dungeons and Dragons angle when it's not there, it's just wrong. Jack Chick, in one of his most famous Chick tracks, if you or perhaps his most famous one, is wrong to take this approach. And a lot of these people have my sympathies, being being Christian and trying to figure out the right way to go about things. We've mentioned before, both Stephen and I are Christian, and we try to navigate these kind of situations all the time, and sometimes we navigate it wrongly, and sometimes we navigate it well. Like I when I grew up, I wasn't allowed to do Dungeons and Dragons. I wasn't allowed to read fantasy novels, and my family actually bought me later I was well into my teen years, eventually bought me the Lord of the Rings books, and I think in hindsight, I think it was kind of just an acknowledgement that, okay, I think we were on the wrong path before, and so let's course correct. And so these things happen. These things happen in real time, and you do the best you can. But me being a Christian does not mean I endorse Jack Chick. Jack, chick tracks are just, I mean, infamous, notorious things that are gospel tracks that really, really, really prey on fear and irrational fear. In some just really, manipulative techniques. And these are not something that I would ever endorse. I like reading them because they're hilarious, but Dark Dungeons is one of those that you really actually should read. Not because it's going to convert you, but because it's just funny how stupid it is. And so what happens in this chick track is they're playing Dungeons and Dragons, these seemingly like teens, and the dungeon master is this woman, and she's, I don't know like the ages of everybody, but she seems to be like 20 years older than everyone. And so I don't know if this is just some crazy occultist woman who goes around and sets up games for teenagers to draw them in, but it focuses on two characters. One of them is the thief Blackleaf, and her character dies in the game. And then the other one is the wizard, who is Elfstar. And Elfstar gets to be the 8th level, and that's when the dungeon master approaches Debbie. Sorry, I said wizard. She's a cleric. Debbie, your cleric has been raised to the 8th level. It's time that you learn how to really cast spells. And so the next frame is like this it says the intense occult training through D&D prepared Debbie to accept the invitation to enter a witch's coven. And it's got like all these black robed characters that are in this room with a giant pentagram on the ground. Okay. And she's being introduced, and you'll become a priestess of the craft, and so she starts casting spells on her parents to get them to do things for her. But in the meantime, the girl who plays Blackleaf just like can't take it anymore, and she kills herself. And her note says, "It's my fault Blackleaf died. I can't face life alone." And that's where Debbie, or Elfstar, is rocked to her core and realizes that she has to get away from this Dungeons and Dragons before it kills her too. And it gets to the very, very famous line, and my favorite line in the whole thing is when the DM is scolding her, and it's like, she says, "Don't be stupid, Debbie. I think you better let Elfstar take care of things." See the subtle hint there that Elfstar is actually another personality, or perhaps even a demon that is possessing her. "You're getting out of control." At which Debbie says, "I don't want to be Elfstar anymore. I want to be Debbie." And so then Debbie becomes a Christian, and she prays that I want you, being Jesus, to be in charge of everything, not that lousy D&D manual. And it's one of those things like, well, that's great that you found God, but I mean, this is not really a thing that happened. I mean, like with all things, we can take them to an extreme. With video games, and with Dungeons and Dragons, and with basketball, and with movies, with books, with all these things, we can take them to an extreme where in Christian terms they become like an idol to us, or in non-Christian terms they kind of take control of our lives. And that certainly has happened with people with Dungeons and Dragons, and continues to happen. And that deserves caution. deserves caution when we get into video games, and it deserves caution when we get into any of these sorts of entertainment. And that's why I really like having the guys from the Backlog Book Breakdown on, because that's the whole point of their podcast is approaching these things with moderation and appreciating them for what they are, and the joy and relaxation they bring to our lives, but to not let them get out of control. That's kind of, I mean, that's always a warning that we should be making to ourselves all the time. But at the same time, Jack Chick is just lying. It's just lying about what happens in Dungeons and Dragons. And that's not excusable. Now he made a hilarious track, but it's not one that honors the truth. So this thing spilled over, the Satanic Panic spilled over into a lot of things, and there are some figures that came into this discussion out of real tragedy, and these are people I do not put in the same class as a Jack Chick, even though they oppose pastime that I really enjoy. Patricia Pulling is one of them. She started the Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons, or BAD, which really advocated, outright banning Dungeons and Dragons. And this came from a point of tragedy, because her son committed suicide, in 1982. And her son had been an avid D&D player. And I think this is just part of who we are. She was grasping for reasons, and she was grasping to understand why, and she landed on Dungeons and Dragons. And this is something that we do during tragedy. This we look for an explanation. And sometimes the explanation isn't there. So bad was the result. And she went on, she was an advocate. I mean, kind of pushing this Satanic Panic for many, many years. And a lot of it was made just completely, out of ignorance. And she was, she's very much in favor of really trying to regulate a lot of this stuff. She thought that a very large percent of the population were outright Satanists, and so a lot of it was not done rationally, and ended up being some really bad resources. There were some others kind of in this, similar situation, and that had family members died, and we're looking for reasons. The 1985 segment on 60 Minutes had Patricia Pulling on it, as well as others, including Gary Gygax, but the other parents of people who were said to have committed suicide over the game. And so all of this hitting the television at the same time really kind of pulled Dungeons and Dragons very much into this larger larger nationwide conversation that we know today as the Satanic Panic, and that this just permeated a lot of stuff, and is the reason why, those of us about my age just have this memory as a kid. It's like this: no one in respectable families played this thing, especially no one in church-going families. But even then, no one in respectable families that didn't go to church played this thing. I had a single friend in high school who played, and I have no idea where he got his gaming group, because we knew all the same people, but one single person. And so that kind of the way things went. TSR did react. When the second edition of AD&D came out in 89, they took a lot of those references to demons and devils out and just made up terms for them. I mean, it was largely the same thing, but they were kind of moving things more into the fantasy realm instead of drawing as much from the occultic realm. And a lot of these references were restored eventually as things died down, but it did have an effect. It had a bad effect on this, because so many of us that would have really loved this stuff missed out. I was definitely part of that nerd group. I grew up and I was big, and so I could play sports, and I did well with basketball because I was the first person to get a growth spurt, and I was taller than everybody. But I really liked science fiction. I wasn't allowed to really do fantasy, but I really like science fiction and Star Trek and stuff like that. And so this if this had been something that was not under that dark cloud, I probably would have liked it. But at the same time, I probably wouldn't have known about it without the Satanic Panic. Because, like it or not, I mean, popularity was growing, but these events made Dungeons and Dragons a household name. And it made all of us aware that it existed. And so, like, right away, even that same year in 80, sales of the game were starting to explode and put it on a trajectory where it really did become something that all of us know, and a good portion of us have played. And, it brought us to the level of popularity where we started getting video games like Eye of the Beholder, like Pool of Radiance, that like SSI could be confident that they would, make a profit on these games. And so even if I would not have been allowed to buy those games at the time that they were made, I do get to buy them on GOG now and very much enjoy them. And so I do, you kind of have to give the whole thing credit for just reminding us that if you tell people they can't do something, their curiosity will be piqued. And that's exactly what happened here. And so, for a lot of us, the Satanic Panic caused us, even if we were swept up in it at first, caused us to pause and actually look into these things to find out if they were dangerous or if they were actually just great fun. And with that, I think that we will put our D&D series to bed. I really do thank you for joining us this whole time. I've had an absolute blast with this, and I'm currently playing Pool of Radiance, and so I'll still be talking about this for a while as we get into that. Please do remember our Patreon patreon.com/technofunkboy. It does mean a lot to us, and we do want to make that a great value for you as well. And so we are putting out songs there that you can download and keep, and we will continue to add content there as well. And so we really do appreciate it. Until next time, have fun, and we will talk with you next week.
The Retro Zoo Super Show is brought to you by the Techno Funk Boy. Follow us on Twitter at Techno Funk Boy, on Facebook at the Techno Funk Boy, and sign up for our email list at technofunkboy.com. Also look for us on Spotify, iTunes, and Amazon for music. If you are so inclined, please leave us a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast catcher. If you are not so inclined, you are obviously some sort of villain trying to conquer the world. Unowned music and gameplay clips are used for educational and critical purposes. Thank you for listening. Keep gaming. And once you have responsibilities that need to be done at this time, then you can game later.